Hello, everybody. I'm very happy that people have come back to hear the third in a four-part course of the 4 Buddhist paths to happiness and well-being. My name is Jeffrey Carr. I've been a member of the Sangha of the Chenrezig Tibetan Buddhist Center, which is in Philadelphia. I've been a member for many years, and it's a great privilege to get to present an overview, a map, sort of almost a schematic of this beautiful, very intricate and marvelous spiritual practice, religion, philosophy, and way of life, which is what Buddhism is. So right on your screen, I hope you're seeing right now, here's our 4 classes. We're on the 3rd class, the Diamond Path of Realization, which we will shortly discuss what that means. We've already done a path in suffering, which is as far as we can tell, based on the early teachings of the Buddha, the actual discourses that the historic Buddha made, and which form the core of what is called the Theravadan path. We've done the great path of awakening, which is a great flowering of Buddhism into many, many forms of religious and spiritual practice. We've talked about that last week. This week, the Diamond Path is the Vajrayana path. It's called the Diamond Path because it's supposed to be absolutely clear and absolutely indestructible, like a diamond. And I want to please ask everybody's forbearance about next week. I realized that I had inadvertently scheduled the last class on Passover, and I certainly don't want to interfere with a sacred holiday. So I am asking everybody to please try to make it on Saturday, April 7th for the last class in this 4-course series. So please, I hope that's going to work out for people. If not, well, you can always watch the recording. In my experience, watching it live has a special kind of quality that the recording doesn't quite convey. So see if you can make it live, if you possibly can. As I explained in the very first class, when you present teachings in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, it's often described as a 3-part process based on what are you trying to do, what is this about, how do you plan to go about learning it or teaching it or practicing it, and finally, what do you hope to gain from it? So as I've been saying, this is not a meditation class, and it's also, we just don't have time to go into detail, although I'll provide as much detail as I think is necessary, but to go into great detail in this extraordinary richness of all of these terms, all of these ideas, and all these practices that I'm going to be presenting to you. So it's an outline, it's a map, it's a guide. I'm going to be doing most of the talking. I wish we had time for sharing, but it's just not enough time. It's too much material. And I'm also, in each case, going to give a basic meditational practice or approach that is associated with each one of the 4 paths. It's up to you to get these 4 ideas about practice. And if you aren't already practicing them, maybe think about incorporating them into your own personal practice. And for those of you fairly new to meditation, well, then find out about them. And they are actually in a good order to approach. And I'll review briefly again the different meditational practices associated with the 4 separate paths. What I want you to have here is like an outline, a schematic of sort of what the terminology, what the territory is as you're getting involved with Buddhist practice. And what I want is, as you progress in your own spiritual practices, these phrases, these words, these definitions might come back to you. And you might be inspired to look them up, of course, on the internet. You might ask your teachers more about them. And they might also help you put together all the things that you're experiencing and find where do they all fit in this vast spiritual program of Buddhism. This, as I explained, is the Diamond Path of Realization. And if you'll remember the first class that dealt with the Hinayana, called the Small Raft, the path of the relief of personal suffering. You remember we had a wheel on that one. And I said the wheel was emblematic of the earliest images of Buddha, and Buddhism rather. And it represented the Noble Eightfold Path to liberation, which was Buddha's prescription, almost like a physician, but a prescription for the end of suffering. If you remember the second class, the Mahayana, the Great Path, when Buddhism expanded into just a very complex set of religions, approaches, spiritual practices based on cultural preferences and based, frankly, on a non-monastic ideal. People who were not monks got interested in Buddhism. You remember I had sort of an image of a celestial Buddha. It wasn't really a human being. It was like a statue of an idealized Buddha figure that sort of represented a spiritual approach for everybody. Well, here's a completely different kind of image altogether. It doesn't look anything like a human being. It's a blue figure, and it is a Vajrayana deity. And it is, I am pretty sure, Vajrasattva at this point. And I'll be talking a lot more about this very different approach to spiritual practice as we go through this presentation. It's a very big presentation, so I'm going to have to go very fast, and I hope I can get through it in our 2 hours. So, as I mentioned, the 4 approaches that I'm talking about in this presentation, the 4 philosophies, the 4 paths of spirituality are the Hinayana, associated with the Theravadan path, the original teachings of the Buddha, the Mahayana, the so-called great vehicle, the path for everyone, developed in the great Buddhist universities of India, up to 1,000 years after the death of the historic Buddha, the Vajrayana, the diamond path, which I'll talk more about where that came from, and finally, Dzogchen, which is the most easiest and the most difficult of all the spiritual practices, and one that is gaining very wide popularity right now, and it's going to be probably for me the most difficult one to talk about. So each share core teachings of the Buddha. They each developed in sequence historically, although this is disputed by many pious Buddhists. Each accomplishes this goal of Buddhist practice, which is the elimination of suffering and ultimately, short-term or long-term, what the Buddhists call enlightenment. But they each do so in completely different ways, very different practices, rituals, and understandings and cultural influences. And I'm going to be reviewing what we talked about last class. What are the 4 principal tenets that unify all the different practices of Buddhism? I'm going to review that quickly later on. And finally, Buddhism is very diverse because people are diverse. And there is literally something in the practices of Buddhism for every particular kind of aspirant, the one who aspires towards this stuff, based on your individual capacity, based on your individual interest and goals, and finally, based on previous experiences in this and other lives that might have prepared you or already gotten you involved with various kind of paths of liberation. And for me, that might include other spiritualities, other religions. So as I explained, the Hinayana, the little vehicle, is so-called because its goal is individual awakening. The Hinayana is not a term necessarily embraced by the actual practitioners of, for example, the Theravadan teachings. It is a term sort of given to them by the Mahayana people. So you'll sometimes get in sort of some mindfulness-based meditation people that say, well, that Hinayana, that's no term we ever came up with, and that's basically true. It's based on the original teachings of the Buddha, and as I explained in the first class, those were not actually written down for many centuries after the historic Buddha's death. The teachings have been passed down through an oral tradition, word of mouth, by monks who were particularly adept at memorizing things. That practice, by the way, is still done. One of the teachers I work with now, I live out in California now, one of my personal teachers now has memorized enormous scriptures verbatim. So it was passed down orally for many centuries. The Hinayana is often identified, it's not synonymous, but it's identified with the school of Theravadan Buddhism, the teachings of the elders, still actively practiced in Southeast Asia. It's also the basis for a lot of the contemporary insight meditation and mindfulness movements and contemporary meditation practice. And it's based ultimately on the Buddha ideal of monastic renunciation of worldly desires. The Buddha was a renunciate. He was an ascetic, and he practiced to leave the world behind, go to the forest and practice virtue. Finally, you acquire virtue 2 ways. First, you will learn to overcome and eliminate all the negative mindful states which are causing a lot of problems. You know, hatred, greed, covetousness, lustful attachments, all those negative mind states. And it's also to replace them or foster positive mind states. Generosity, selflessness, love for other beings, what is called metta. Anyway, training and purifying the mind. The goals of the Hinayana included the development of metta or loving kindness, real focus on the mind. One of the hallmarks of Buddhism is that it is not about gods or demons. It's not about fate. It's up to you. It's an aspect, it's an emanation of your own mind. So cultivation of mental concentration, to get away from all the distracting thoughts, to get away from all the conflicting emotions, to create a calm, peaceful, and joyous state of mind. This is done through the practice of a kind of meditation called shamatha, which means calm abiding. That is, I will give in a later slide, that is the bedrock for all Buddhist meditation practice. And you should be actively cultivating your shamatha practice. That is calm abiding and concentration. It's related to vipassana or insight. That's glimpses of the true state of your mind through the confusion of what the Buddhists call delusion or attached frame of mind. So that's called vipassana, states of insight. That is also will stay with you the entire Buddhist path. Shamatha and vipassana, those two aspects of meditation practice are very much part of all of the four paths. Finally, the goal of the Hinayana include what the Buddha called nirvana, peace. And a close approximation of its meaning is actual extinction. It means the extinction of personal suffering. And Buddha promised that it would completely eliminate personal suffering. One who's achieved this state, and there were many monks in Buddha's time, and there are many people now who've achieved nirvana, and you're called an arhat. You remember, as I explained, is whenever your egoistic mind abates, it actually does for short periods of time, all right? You're actually in a state of nirvana, of no personal suffering. And I talked about this on one of these talks previously. So how do you go about shamatha? There is a wonderful way to approach it called the Four Foundations of Mindfulness. This is the hallmark of the mindfulness-based meditation programs, and you should know about them because the principal path to develop calm, focused, and undistracted mind is the concentration on breathing. It is the starting meditation. It is by no means easy. You can actually go all the way to enlightenment just practicing mindfulness-based meditation. It's that important. The Buddha himself taught this to his monks, and it is mindfulness based on breathing. It's anapanasati meditation. I explained it a little bit. In fact, I introduced, I think, our first class, I introduced the notion of mindfulness-based focused breathing where you focus on your breath. But there's three other contemplations. You don't necessarily have to be sitting in a meditation posture to practice these. One is the contemplation. That's why I use contemplation rather than meditation. Becoming totally aware of the sensations and feelings of the body. That's considered, by the way, you can come to very profound states of samadhi by practicing contemplations of sensations and feelings of the body. If I were teaching a meditation course, I would spend a whole class just on that. The other one is the contemplation on all the various frames of mind. I like that better than mind states. Frames of mind. They change constantly. And it includes emotions, moods, feelings, mental states. And until you begin this contemplation, you don't realize that your mind, like the weather, is changing moment to moment to moment. And finally, a contemplation of dharmas. Dharma just means the way something is. What is it? How do you explain it? That's the dharma of something. And we are filled with beliefs, ideas, thoughts, and conceptions, many of which, or most of which, we're unconscious of. It's how to identify what you actually think. So that's the original path. And I didn't even talk about the Four Noble Truths and all that because we spent the whole first talk all about that stuff. The second path is called the Mahayana. And in that little slide, you see an image of, I guess it's the ruins of Nalanda University, which about in medieval India, which is about 1,000 years ago, give or take a couple of hundred years, there was gigantic communities of monks practicing meditation, but more than that, commentaries on the sutras and developing philosophical systems that explain some of the insights that the Buddha had. Although they're based on the historic Buddha, they actually added a number of ideas which were not really in the very first teachings of the Buddha. The Mahayana includes dozens of different kinds of religious and cultural expressions of Buddhism, as different as Zen meditation, Japanese monks sitting in black robes, to Pure Land Buddhism, which is dozens and dozens of monks in sort of orange robes and lay people sitting in rows and every practicing offerings to golden Buddhas and much more devotional, a little like in our Western culture, the difference between, well, I hope I'll say the right thing, the kind of religion that taught by the Christ, by Jesus, renunciate monks, which is what they were, versus some high mass in the Catholic Church. And the Mahayana has the same kind of variety of religious expression. Some of the ideas from the Mahayana, it expanded this goal of nirvana, the end of personal suffering, into an ideal of Buddhahood or enlightenment or universal salvation for all sentient beings. That is called the Bodhisattva ideal. And a Bodhisattva is, let's see if I can find, it's a semi-divine being that's forsaken Buddhahood for the sake of compassion. And I talked a little bit more about that in our last class. A Bodhisattva is this divine being. It can be a human being who has developed to some extent bodhicitta, which is an awakened mind of complete compassion because it completely gets, I use that term from my generation, completely groks the whole universe of why beings are suffering and how they can eliminate their states of suffering. And it gives it great, great compassion, not pity, which is very different, but compassion for all beings. The Mahayana developed the notion of that there is a Tathagata Garbha, which is a fundamental nature of all beings, is Buddha. Buddha inhabits, you can either say, well, I'll go into it later, different conceptions of how Buddha nature is the foundations for all individual beings' awareness of reality. It developed the ideal of two basic truths, two ways to approach the nature of reality. One is the relative way, and I'll explain a little bit more about that later on. That's ordinary reality. And then there is this sense of the absolute reality, which is the Buddha nature, or what Buddha would call the interdependent arising nature of all reality. Nothing is separate from everything else. Everything is occurring in relationship to everything else. Related to that is the union of compassion and wisdom. If you really get the unity, relative reality and absolute reality, they say our heart automatically, without effort, is automatically open. So there is a union of compassion and wisdom. We cannot help but feel compassionate relationship with all other expressions throughout the universe. The goal is obtaining enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings. How does this happen? I'll explain it a little bit later. And the Mahayana assumes this is a big difference. Remember, the arhats with Buddha, they would expect to obtain what they call a stream emperor. They would get glimpses of the truth with the Buddha, and some of them obtained nirvana. Or the Buddha would say they would obtain it in a few lifetimes. They would obtain nirvana, extinction of personal suffering, in a certain way, extinction of the personal troubled self. The Mahayana says this larger vision of enlightenment might take many, many lifetimes, and that a good, pious Mahayana practitioners would not necessarily expect to become enlightened in a single lifetime. They would expect this as a process, and that it might be a process that goes on for eons. That's part of the Bodhisattva ideal. So what is it that unifies all these various expressions of Buddhism? They seem to be sometimes almost contradictory. Nevertheless, they're based on, and this is part of the tradition, 4 fundamental insights. It is said that if whatever you're listening to exhibits these 4 understandings of the nature of reality, it's Buddhism, no matter how weird it is, okay? But if you're listening to something that does not include or denies these 4 teachings, okay, whatever it is that you're listening to is not really Buddhism, okay? The 4 seals are, I wrote them down here because I'm going to go on to them. I think they're so important that I'm going to spend a little bit of time in review. We went over these extensively last class, but let me going to review them a little bit. All compounded things are impermanent. Very, very important. What's a compounded thing? Anything that's made out of other parts, which includes just about everything we experience. All of our thoughts, all our perceptions, what we think is the outside world, what we think is our inside world of our beliefs, our habits, our addictions. Okay? It's subject to change. When I wrote decay, everything will fall apart eventually. No matter how beautiful it is. Our bodies, all our cherished ideals, our whole civilization, everything is a process of change and decay and falling apart and new things coming out of it. Everything changes. So everything is everything changes and is impermanent except for that fact. And this is a real fundamental thing. We have to really get into it because that's the way things are. Even our thoughts and ideas, everything has changed to constant change and flux. You can contemplate this, but there's only, I won't get there. We'll talk about it in Dzogchen. There is something that doesn't change, but it's Buddha nature. But that's a big discussion. Everything else is constantly changing because everything's an expression of Buddha nature. Since our minds expect something to stay permanent, our beliefs, relationships, the Buddha, something we got to believe in that stays permanent, but everything changes. By the way, the Buddha prophesied that the Dharma itself would become extinguished. The Buddha, that was also subject to change and decay. Okay? So since we want permanence to be happy, at least count on something, all right, this causes our fundamental suffering. The second, speaking of suffering, the second seal is something which doesn't always sound very, politically correct for we Westerners, because we like to really think that the individual is very important. And we really trust our instincts, our feelings, our convictions. The Buddha said that all of our thoughts and emotions and feelings based on a sense of a separate, independent self, okay, ego self, which I talked about a lot last time, is inevitably going to cause us pain and discomfort. All right? Why is that? And I'm very fond, because I think these are very wise, of the 8 worldly concerns. The ego self, if you look into it, and please do, you realize this is the software program that runs your ego mind. All right? You're not always in your ego mind. There are moments contemplating nature. There are moments in samadhi when you're meditating. There are times when you're just sort of spaced out and looking up into the sky where the ego mind temporarily disappears. And these 4 programs are not in operation. But 99% of the time, you're thinking, you're acting, okay? And your sense of reality is based on things that you like and things that you don't like, number 1. Things that give you pleasure and things that give you pain. Things that you feel are making you're getting, and then your fear of losing. And finally, things that make you feel good about yourself, praise, and anything that makes you feel diminished or you're being under attack, blame. Okay, the 8 worldly concerns. Imagine, first of all, contemplate that your whole life is ruled by this stuff. Very important. Spend a year on it. Then imagine being free of it, because it's very possible through Buddhist practice to be free of the 8 worldly concerns. Guess what? Almost all of your problems will be gone just when these things are gone. They are the essence of suffering. Finally, the 3rd seal. All phenomena, everything we're looking at, is empty. It doesn't truly have an independent, self-existent quality. everything is, as I said earlier, is compounded of separate parts, but more deeply, more profoundly is the concept of sunyata, which early on in the translation of Buddhism was translated as emptiness. I don't like that translation. Most people don't, because it implies there's nothing there. There certainly is something there, but nothing is independent of anything else. I went through this extensively last time. Quickly, our bodies, for example, we get kind of very attached to our bodies, really believe our bodies. First of all, it's silly to be attached to it because you look at it, it changes, certainly from year to year. But for those who are paying attention, you wake up one morning with a backache. You didn't have it yesterday. You have a headache. All right? In a while, it will go away. Your body's always changing. It's not a separate thing. You eat the wrong food, you get ill. You eat good food, you'll be healthier. You see, you're dependent on your food. You're interacting with your food and environment. You're part of the air you breathe. The elements that comprise your body were ultimately created in the supernova, in the star systems. All right? Nothing is separate from anything else. We're actually sort of energy systems. And that's an excellent way to conceive of your existence. The Mahayana doctrine of sunyata, or emptiness, it is central to Buddhism, and especially the Mahayana and, all the Buddhist systems. It's just the Hinayana tend to think of things as impermanent in the sense that they're born, they persist, then they decay and fall apart. That's sort of the Hinayana way of thinking about it. The Mahayana concept of sunyata says that everything exists in relationship to everything else. There is nothing that is independent. Everything. This means that whatever you are, cannot really be separated from what everything else is. You are, in one way or another, related to the most distant stars and galaxies. For one thing, you're made out of atoms and molecules, and as far as physicists tell us, so is the galaxies out there, and dark matter. I guess we're made of dark matter also. So part of this is that we still have an ordinary world that we live in. In fact, there's an analogy with physics where they would talk about Newtonian physics of bodies with gravitational fields and all that. One way that still seems to exist in reality. But then there's quantum theory where it seems like, how do those two things fit together? They do, but how do they fit together? Similarly, in Mahayana, there is the absolute and the relative, which I touched on before. There is a sutra, which sutra means a teaching. It's like a dialogue originally given by the Buddha. But there is a sutra that's it's central to Mahayana Buddhism. It's being recited as we speak in Buddhist temples and in Buddhist study groups all over the world. It's called the Heart Sutra. The Heart Sutra is a distillation. It's like meant to be recited to recall to mind the central ideas, and a slightly bigger version of the Heart Sutra. It's actually quite a bit bigger, called the Prajnaparamita Sutra, which is based on a really gigantic compendium of teachings. It's the heart of the heart of the heart of the heart of the Mahayana. And the heart of the heart of the heart of the heart of the Heart Sutra is this notion that form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. Form is none other than emptiness. Emptiness, none other than form. When you get this, and the Prajnaparamita Sutra is designed to help you understand this, you've just figured it out. You've gotten Mahayana Buddhism. It's the heart of the whole beast. And I think about it every single day, a lot. So, and practice with it. And as Buddhists, you should too. It's the key. The fourth seal, nirvana is peace. Nirvana, in this, as I said earlier, meant extinction, but it's pretty subtle. So, nirvana is beyond extremes. What does that mean? Well, there's a scholar who says nirvana is beyond all terms of duality, that means self and the world, and relativity. That means I'm subject to impermanence and change and all that. It's beyond duality and relativity. It's therefore beyond any kind of conception of good and evil. It's beyond right and wrong. It's beyond existence and non-existence. Buddhism is very careful to distinguish. They said, we're talking about nirvana, when we're talking about emptiness. We're not talking about nothing. It's not nothing. There is something there. There's something happening. At the same time, it is not at all the way you think it is, like this coffee cup as being a real and separate entity from me that has its own existence independently of anything else. It's not like that at all. That's the way we think. So anyway, is the understanding, the grokking of nirvana is beyond any kind of these conceptual things, and the mind just can't get around it, the normal mind. Dongsa Kensei Rinpoche, who was a great Vajrayana practitioner and teacher, says, in many philosophies or religions, the final goal is something that you can hold on to and to keep. It's the truth, I understand it, I'm saved. So no, the final goal is the only thing that truly exists. But nirvana is not fabricated. So it's not something you can hold on to. You can't grasp it. You can't say, I got it, I understand it. You can't say that. It's beyond anything like that. Okay? So when you go on the internet and look up nirvana, and please do, you're going to find it defined very different ways by different schools of Buddhism as people attempt to find words for something that cannot really be conceptualized. It can't be conceived of. The Buddha taught that because of that, because nirvana is beyond human conceptualization or imagination, he said, don't even bother trying to figure it out. Nevertheless, we do, because we're human beings and we want to figure things out. So we're talking about nirvana, but the Mahayana developed even a larger ideal of enlightenment. Okay, well then what's enlightenment if we can't even talk about nirvana? Okay, first of all, as I explained earlier, it's assumed that enlightenment is something to be gained over many, many lifetimes by acquiring merit, which is I'm going to call spiritual power, spiritual virtue, and insight, which means gradually deepening experience of emptiness. Not understanding, but direct experience in meditation. Eventually, you do it without meditation, but experience of emptiness over many lifetimes. Quote, this is from Matthew Ricard, who's a highly regarded Buddhist practitioner and a close friend of the Dalai Lama. Enlightenment is a state of perfect knowledge or wisdom, combined with an infinite compassion. Knowledge in this case does not mean merely the accumulation of data or a description of the world of phenomenon down to all the finest details. That's what some people think, that enlightenment is some kind of omniscience where you understand everything that's happening. That's a common misconception. That's what he's referring to here. Enlightenment is an understanding of both the relative mode of existence, the way things appear to us, and also the ultimate mode of existence, the true nature of these same appearances. That's the absolute and the relative. This includes our own minds, as well as the external world, the interior world and the exterior world. Such knowledge is the basic antidote, the cure towards ignorance and suffering. Good. And a teacher of mine who I'm very fond of, who taught me an immense amount, Jay Lippman, who actually is around Philadelphia, and if you guys are lucky enough to run into him or go to some of his teachings, do so without hesitation and right away and sign up. He's really, really good, and he knows this stuff very well. He once rather mysteriously said that enlightenment is a situation of being of infinite benefit to beings. You know, wrap your head around that. So in Mahayana Buddhism, enlightenment is the higher goal, okay? The highest goal of all for all sentient beings. The Mahayana ideal is to become what I've explained earlier as a bodhisattva who strives to liberate all beings from this cycle of birth and death. Buddha, by the way, we think of person suffering as like, you know, I'm so unhappy, I'm depressed, you know, my life is not working out. That's like, Buddha thought of it as just like life itself was really painful. You know, you died of childbirth, you died of a disease, you know, life was its happiness was fleeting, and its inevitable was often a painful death. So he thought actually a good thing is to end it. I mean, end all this endless transmigration from life to life. That's the original Buddhism, was about escaping all of it. All right? So to liberate all beings from this cycle of birth and death, not necessarily the way we think about it, well, but close. The Mahayana says that all physical forms are void of intrinsic self. and that individual autonomy, again, I'm restating it, we are not, there's no way we can save ourselves unless we save everybody. Like we're all on the Titanic together, all right? All for one and one for all. I mean, it has to be that way. According to the Mahayana, individual enlightenment is not even possible. The only way you can achieve enlightenment, according to the Mahayana, is by dedicating yourself to the welfare of all other sentient beings. Suffering is a universal phenomenon, not a personal suffering, not a personal phenomenon. Okay? All beings have to be enlightened together, not only out of a sense of compassion, but because we cannot really be separate from one another. Remember, first we think of ourselves, and then we think of our family, then we might think of our best friends, and we might think of our little people that we get along with, and, but no, it means all beings, all throughout space and time. It's a vast understanding of creation and what beings are. Another concept in Mahayana, the four immeasurables. They're called the Brahma Viharas. I spoke to them about them quite at length in the last talks. I don't want to spend a lot of time on them now. Those are the four. I think I reviewed them quickly coming up. I think I do. The loving kindness and benevolence, compassion, empathetic joy, and equanimity. They're called the immeasurables because it starts small. Loving kindness, if you're having a lot of trouble being nice, everybody's nice to somebody or something, your cat at least, or your children or your parents or your best friends. You expand that eventually to be loving and benevolent to political figures you may hate, things that might scare the heck out of you, but you still feel loving kindness and benevolence towards it. You can expand this infinitely. Same thing with your compassion, which is the sense of the suffering of other beings and your identification with the suffering of other beings. You actually don't feel quite sorry, but you really get how difficult their circumstances are. Again, practice it on a political figure you might have a hard time with. You can practice compassion for their suffering, their neediness. Empathetic joy is feeling great joy at the joyousness of other beings, the joyousness of life itself, especially joy in Dharma, in sweet things, in wonderful things. Get to the point where you look at the little puppy videos on the YouTube and your eyes well up with tears, even though it's silly. Or better yet, you see a good deed being performed by somebody, and you can't help but just smile and feel wonderful at joyousness, at other activities leading towards greater happiness and well-being. Finally, equanimity. As it was explained, all those first three immeasurables are part of the feeling of total, I'm okay with everything. That's equanimity. You're not stupid. You see that certain things are causing suffering, certain things are problems, but you yourself are you're immovable in your joyousness, in your compassion, in your loving kindness. You cannot be swayed. You are completely at peace in yourself. Wouldn't that be nice to have that? Equanimity. It starts with being able to be a little less reactive to the things that drive you crazy and expands out to being the complete embrace of the universe as a bodhisattva. Okay? The bodhisattva, even in it, the bodhisattva may experience the suffering of other beings, but it itself is not suffering. Another concept, the six paramitas that I went through before. We have so many slides, I want to go through them quickly. They are the qualities of the enlightened mind. What is a bodhisattva? How do they act? What do they think like? Well, this is the way they are. Generosity. Again, these are almost limitless. You start out with a great analogy I just remembered. Let's say generosity. It's called dana, the ability to be open-hearted, giving easily. Let's say many of us clutch. We might give, really a stretch $100 to something we really care about. If we're really rich, we might give, a couple of $100,000. But let's say we're stingy. We all are. I read the practice where you can practice just giving from one hand to another. If it's hard for you, just like this hand, my right hand is going to give the mala to my left hand. You just practice giving things away to open your heart up. The other one is discipline, is ethical activity. I went through this quite a bit in the first class. It said that unless you are striving, you may not have achieved it, but striving to be an ethical person, and it's pretty commonsensical, like don't lie, don't steal, you know, don't hurt others, all the obvious stuff. If you're not striving to be ethical, you're not going to get very far spiritually. Patience. These are supposedly increasingly difficult, by the way, the paramitas. Patience, which I'm actively being taught right now in my own life. How is to be imperturbable, to maintain your open-heartedness, to maintain your compassion under great provocation or when it gets really hard. Patience is also supposed to be a joyous quality to it, all right? Not just endurance, but patience, meaning the ability to put up with frustrations and difficulties because life is difficult. Diligence. Yeah, the translation is something like joyous endeavor. Okay, I like that better than diligence. Joyous endeavor. You enjoy practicing Dharma. You enjoy the effort of being a good and moral person. You enjoy the practice of learning concentration and subduing things. You enjoy the whole process of life, okay, even though it's very difficult. You apply to, you work at it, all right? Meditative concentration is what you develop in shamatha. Anybody who's meditated for 10 minutes know our control of our minds is pathetic. We're completely driven crazy by our constant thinking and our constant changing emotions. And by the way, we believe in things which just are not true. Okay? Drives us nuts. The chief of which is that we have an all-important personal self, that it must be defended at all costs. Okay? All of those things we learn by concentration, how to focus and calm the mind. This leads to wisdom, glimpses of which are caught in deepening states of what they call samadhi, or meditative absorption. Ultimately leads to what they call prajna, insight. And that means completely grokking the simultaneity of absolute and relative reality. Karma and reincarnation, which I went over quite a bit last time, is a very big subject. All right, most people misunderstand karma quite significantly, but it's very important to A, accept the idea that karma exists, and B, begin to understand how it works. Quickly, it works like states of probability. If you perform a lot of good actions and intend them, the Buddhist sense that it all proceeds out of intention and out of the mind. What you think is your bad luck and your fate. They say, well, actually, it's the base of inevitable karmas accumulated through countless lifetimes. And there's been, all of us have accumulated a lot of misdeeds, and they have led to your present circumstances. And it's difficult. It's not like fate. Maybe focus it on this way. You are in charge of what your experience in this life, and consequently in subsequent lives, what your experience of life will be. And the Buddhists say, and I think it's true, your circumstances, the surroundings that are in your life, they will also change based on your karma, your evolving states of karma. Close to this is the notion of reincarnation, which the Buddhists take for granted. There are a number of people who don't like the idea of reincarnation, and they're trying to come up with sorts of forms of Buddhism without reincarnation. I don't know how you can do it, but good luck. Again, it's worth investigating what the Buddhists mean by reincarnation. They do not mean the, what is the word for a, not reincarnation, I don't know if it's transmigration, but it's not a soul. You, what you think you are, your personality, your addictions, your hopes and dreams, that doesn't end up in another life in a new body. What you are, which is the whole state of probabilities, your good and bad intentions in life, your pleasures and pains, all your whole mind state as a set of interrelated causalities, that survives death. The personality doesn't, but the karma does, and that generates the new body. It's very subtle, it's very complicated. You should look into it, and I would suggest the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying, which I think goes into it. There's also other ones, Words of My Perfect Teacher, go into it a lot more. There's other descriptions of what exactly transmigrates from life to life. By the way, the rebirth is usually considered automatic, but there are certain highly developed yogis and some of the great Tibetan yogis who are able to choose the circumstances and the place of their rebirth, so it is said. So finally, we're getting to all of that stuff I went over because it directly impinges on what the Vajrayana is about. The Vajrayana means the thunderbolt vehicle. A Vajra is a thunderbolt or a scepter. It's developed within it's considered part of the Mahayana traditions in medieval India. It's considered part of the Mahayana, and it's spread to neighboring countries, notably Tibet, after Buddhism was largely wiped out by the Muslim invasions at the end of this medieval period. I don't know exactly. I think it's 1400 sometimes when there were successive invasions from the north and extinguished most of Buddhism. And it was a diaspora into neighboring countries. And that's how Buddhism came to Tibet. The Vajrayana was a fusion of the ideals of the Mahayana Buddhism that we've been going over to, but also the developing systems of Tantra, a very different approach to spirituality. Tantra was evolving in India at the same time that Buddhism was, and there was a tremendous amount of mutual exchange, including the sharing of saints. There are progenitors. They often have different names, but they're the same source of certain ideals in the Vajrayana with the tantric, for example, Kashmiri Shaivism, which is something I'm studying right now, is Indian-based Tantra. It's a transition from what the Mahayana tended to highlight, a lot of temples, a lot of monks studying the sutras, writing commentaries on the sutra, and developing these wonderful ideas of the Mahayana, and the lay people sort of going to the ritual temples and attending the mass with all the monks in the front, which a lot of the Tibetans, we still do. Okay, that whole thing is being shifted to a different context. The different context is a private and personal relationship of the guru and disciple. That's the heart of the Vajrayana tradition. Yes, there are very large Vajrayana rituals with the Vajra master. Some of us have been to these in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, up in the front going through sort of Vajrayana rituals, and we're all sort of participating, sitting on our seats. But the heart of it is a personal relationship between the Vajrayana master and the pupil. We'll talk more about that later. The term Vajra is used to signify what is considered absolutely real and indestructible compared to all of this changing ideas and experiences we have as individuals. It is real and indestructible. It's interesting because we talked about earlier about everything being impermanent. It's not quite the same thing. All right. The Vajra is the spiritual pursuit of what is ultimately valuable and indestructible. And I said earlier, I call that Buddha nature. Well, the Vajrayana has a different name for the same phenomenon. All right. There's two paths, in fact, of practice, two approaches you can approach in the Mahayana ideal that you can go about your spiritual sadhana, your spiritual search. One is called the Sutrayana, and that includes the Hinayana practices and most of the Mahayana. And that is fundamentally, it's based on the sutras of the original teachings of the Buddha, ultimately. It means perfecting good qualities, gaining merit and wisdom, okay? It may take many lifetimes. It also involves subduing the negative aspects and troubling and suffering aspects of your own mind. That's part of it. The goal is to practice the development of bodhicitta, which is an enlightened and compassionate state of mind, and the adoption of the bodhisattva's way of life, which is the paramitas that I talked about earlier. And to really get the 4 seals and marks of Dharma, really get it. That's the bedrock, okay, to be a bodhisattva. Intention is considered key. Your motivation for why you're doing all of this. And finally, the goal is to make progress over many lifetimes toward obtaining Buddhahood, but for the sake of sentient beings, saving all sentient beings. The Tantrayana is based on the Tantras, and it's also called the Mantrayana. It's based on mantra or inner purification. Is a method of taking the outcome of Buddhahood as the path. Very different. We aren't working towards something else. We're already there, but we don't know it. Very different approach. We're not working. It's not that Buddha is within us waiting to be released. We are Buddha, but we're deluded. We don't know that. We don't experience that. So how do we experience our own perfection? How do we experience the complete elimination of all suffering? Well, what the Tantrayana or the Vajrayana is about purification. We purify those things which are causing us our delusions. Okay, more about that later. The Vajrayana says if you can do this, you can achieve full enlightenment in one lifetime, this lifetime, not countless lifetimes, not a bodhisattva ideal, this lifetime. But you have to completely give up what you are now and be willing to open into being something that you can't even conceive of. Complete commitment. It's the core of Tibetan Buddhism. As I said during the diaspora, that formed the nucleus of all of the spirituality of Tibetan Buddhism, the Mahayana, but also tantric practices. And also, I'm going to say, I don't know if I mentioned it here, there was a sort of a shamanistic native religion called Bon in Tibet that represented, that also got mixed into this Buddhism and formed that particular tantric Buddhism of Tibet. The Vajrayana draws on all the core teachings of both the Mahayana and the Hinayana, and you should know all of these. If not, review it, because they're fundamental to your Buddhist practice. I wrote the 3 Noble Truths. It's the 4 Noble Truths, the 3 baskets of ethics, concentration, and wisdom. I talked about that. The 6 paramitas. Why do the Buddhists use these number systems, which I just got wrong with the 4 Noble Truths? It's because it was an oral tradition and because you were supposed to remember all this stuff. You're supposed to study it and learn it. Okay? Ultimately, find its truth in your own heart, in your own experience. But you should learn these. The 6 paramitas, the ideal of the bodhisattva, the 2 truths of relative and absolute reality, and nirvana, enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings, and other concepts that I've been trying to bring up. And there's a lot I haven't been bringing up because there's a lot to it. All right? The Vajrayana techniques claim that they will cause an accelerated path to your experience of your own enlightenment. The distinctive feature of the Vajrayana is its ritual. They got that from Indian spiritual practice. I've learned a lot about ritual. By the way, we're all fortunate in that we have a Vajra master, a ritual master in Losam Samten. He is a Vajrayana teacher. He's a master of Vajrayana ritual. And it's amazing that you have access to that. It can be used as a substitute or alternative to the earlier contemplative and philosophic traditions of meditation. I should have used spiritual practice. In the Mahayana, for example, the monks and to some degree the lay disciples in the Theravada and Mahayana monasteries are often busy studying sutras endlessly. They're developing concentration exercising, calming shamatha-based meditation, and finally practicing on loving kindness, okay, or the bodhicitta ideal. Analytical meditations on emptiness means that you study, read, contemplate all the commentaries, people talking about these abstract notions, and they're conceptual. They're called views. Nothing wrong with having a conceptual view. Then you develop on your ability to really experience these things directly in your meditation and spiritual practices, okay? The Vajrayana, this is new. The 3 turnings of the wheel of Dharma. In the view of the Vajrayana, this isn't necessarily the view of the Mahayana or the Hinayana people. In the view of the Vajrayana, there were 3 routes to enlightenment: the Vajrayana, the Mahayana, and the Hinayana. According to this view, the historic Buddha taught 3 called the turnings of the wheel of Dharma. If you've been attending Sundays at the Tibetan Buddhist Center, I think you must have heard this, the turnings of the wheel of Dharma. The first turning was supposedly taught by the historic Buddha when he taught the 4 Noble Truths at Varanasi, 5th century BC India, northern India, around what Nepal, roughly where Nepal is now, which led to the founding of Buddhism, and it led to the early monastic schools of Buddhism. But the oldest scriptures don't mention any other turnings other than this very first teaching by the Buddha. The Mahayana tradition, by tradition, claims a second turning, in which the perfection of wisdoms, that's the Prajna Paramita, that's the Heart Sutra. I told you that was the heart of the beast, about emptiness, were taught at Vulture's Peak, which led to the Mahayana. There's a cute story I read recently that when the Buddha preached emptiness to these monks, many of whom were arhats, and he said, not only your personal self doesn't exist. That's what led to your arhathood. But he said, did you know all of this phenomenon that you experience around you, that doesn't exist? Did you know that even the scriptures, the notion of enlightenment and personal salvation, that doesn't truly exist? Everything is interdependent arising, and even that doesn't truly exist. The translation said they had a heart attack. It was the heart attack sutra. They just went, it couldn't take it. Anyway, they say the Mahayana scriptures were actually written from the 1st century CE. That's, I think the Buddha was about 580 BC or so. So that's many centuries, and well into the period where these great monastic communities and universities were developing in medieval India. The Vajrayana tradition goes on to say that there was a third turning during the historic Buddha's life, which took place at this Dhyana Kakata, I can't pronounce that one, Dede Yakataka, 16 years after the Buddha's enlightenment. But in actual, the scholars who looked into it say actually the Vajrayana Buddhist text appeared as late as the 3rd century CE, and they were basically borrowed sometimes very directly from Indian Tantra. I'm finding that out from my current teacher right now is teaching me about Indian Vajrayana, or Indian Tantric philosophical systems. And they continue to appear about the 12th century CE. They continue to evolve. That's the thing what you have to remember about Buddhism too. Buddhism is impermanent. What we are now in this Western country, specifically American, we are actually developing our own forms, schools of Buddhism as we speak. I'm part of it, you're part of it, okay? We're adapting Buddhism to our own culture and our own mentality and our own ways of being. It's very exciting, very new, okay? What I'm doing right now is I'm trying to be as traditional as I possibly can based on what was taught to me. I'm trying not to teach any of these newer schools of Buddhism. Other parts of the Vajrayana, the Two Truths doctrine, which I've talked about already. The Vajrayana completely subscribed to the Two Truths doctrine of conventional and ultimate truth. It's a central concept. It's the basis for all of the philosophical systems of the Vajrayanas. Okay? I talked about it before. Conventional truth is what we experience in space-time reality, including our ego. I'm here, you guys are out there. That's the relative truth. It's silly to pretend that I'm not experiencing that. Some of us can get excited and start saying, nothing is real. No, it's very real, but in a relative way. It's very real, but in a relative way. Okay? Common sense notions of what does and does not exist. Don't walk in front of the bus. I mean, you're going to be hit by the bus in relative reality. Okay? At the same time, ultimate truth is this interdependent arising, everything being connected to everything else. Everything is mere energy systems manifesting. I'll talk more about this as Dzogchen, which is totally devoted about really getting the absolute view. Ultimate truth is prajna, wisdom. And you can, and you should, and the purpose of it, tantric sadhana, is to gain views, glimpses and views, and deepening experience of the absolute nature of reality. Mahayana Vajrayana. Another way to think of them is the causal and fruitional vehicles. I've actually never said that out loud before. The Mahayana, for example, we work through the relative truth in order to arrive at some sense of the absolute truth, sunyata. The relative world actually is regarded as not really existent in the way we think it is. There's emphasis on realizing the true way that everything is completely interrelated with one another, which is the same thing as compassion. Our Buddha nature is obscured through attachments to our ego self, kleshas, which are destructive emotions, and our false notions of reality. The relative and absolute bodhicitta, as we get that, we suddenly realize, oh, wisdom, which is insight into the nature of emptiness, and my compassion, which is identification with the suffering and happiness of all sentient beings, aren't the same thing. They go together. By doing so, we become apprentice bodhisattvas on the path, perfecting our understanding, perfecting all of these things through the 10, it's actually called the bhumis, the different states of being a bodhisattva. Finally, the whole path is about accumulating the causes. That's all of this stuff is based on karma. Accumulating the causes for our own enlightenment, eventual enlightenment, through acquiring American wisdom over many lifetimes of obtaining higher and higher notions of wisdom as bodhisattvas. As I said, there's considered, I think, 10, I think I've heard sometimes 12 levels of increasingly sophisticated and subtle understanding of being a bodhisattva. On the other hand, the Vajrayana is a heightened, a deepened, real respect for this world of the body, our personal experience, our physical experience in the body, our experience of our thoughts, and finally, the physical reality that we see out there. It's respecting that. It's getting into that. All right? We realize that all of this it's just the way emptiness, form is emptiness and emptiness is form. Emptiness expresses itself through this world of space-time. We are the expression of emptiness. The world is the expression of emptiness. Nothing wrong with it. So the Vajrayana uses its skillful means, which I'll talk about, to transform our troubled dualistic relationship of me against the world, or I need this, or I love that, I hate that. Okay, transform that relationship and inform it by this truth of interrelationship, interdependence, and emptiness. Okay? The relative world is considered to be sacred. It's an expression of emptiness, an expression of Buddha nature. There's nothing wrong at all with even your nastiest thoughts. There's nothing wrong with terrible things you don't like in the world. Ultimately, it's all expressions of emptiness. And we want to clear away the blockages from experiencing this enlightened point of view. In other words, being completely compassionate. We're already Buddhas, and we have to develop the experience of our true nature. We do this through shamatha and vipassana meditation. I just want to highlight again that these two ways of understanding are the bedrock for all of the meditative traditions. Okay? I don't need to really review, hopefully, shamatha again. Shamatha is two things: learning to develop concentration, but also calming the troubled surface of the mind, calming that, to develop calm, centered, focused meditation techniques. However, you've got to, with that, develop vipassana. It's a slight alteration in the mind, where you use that calm, unruffled state of mind to experience out, direct the attention to the nature of reality, this emptiness nature of reality. Okay? Without use of vipassana, all you do is get kind of happy, spaced out, and nothing really changes. Frankly, if you get really good at shamatha, as soon as you go to work, you'll be right back into dualistic anger and whatever you go into. As soon as you have a lot of trouble, you'll be right back there. You need to develop the insight into, oh, my mind is going crazy because it always does when I talk to this person. That's insight. Because you understand, that person out there, I have a relationship with that person there. The relationship is what's driving me crazy. The person itself is just that person being that person. It's me that's driving myself crazy. No, things like that. Comes out of the notion of interdependence, interdependent arising. You also, prajna, as you get more into it, you really begin to really appreciate what is the 4 seals and marks of existence. You really get into that. You really understand, what dukkha is about, unsatisfactoriness. You really understand what anicca, impermanence, is all about. And finally, this is the most complicated, the fact that you really can't say you have an independent self, even though you're very concerned about it, even though you constantly experience me, doesn't exist. It's always in existence with relationship. That's the only way that the ego self exists. Me is always part of me and him, me and her, me and that, me and it, me and it's always in relationship. That's what forms its reality. It doesn't exist independently. It's a huge victory when you get that, because you begin to experience, nirvana is not being obsessed with that stuff. That's peace. And anyway, out of that develops prajna, or wisdom. in the union of this absolute reality, where everything is related to everything else, and this relative reality where, well, I like this and I don't like that. You don't have to stop liking and disliking things. Just realize that they aren't really real. Your likes and dislikes is just your temporary likes and dislikes. The Buddhists love to point out that people that you consider an enemy now, in a couple of years, they might very well be your friends. Or ideas that you hate now, give it a couple of decades and you agree with those ideas. Everything changes. Goal and motivation of the Vajrayana. You've got to experience the ultimate truth. It's the purpose of all the various tantric techniques practiced in the Vajrayana. The tantric practices are to purify an impure perception of your practitioner. You don't see things the way they truly, truly are. You have to experience this ultimate truth of absolute reality. The goal of spiritual practice within the Mahayana and Vajrayana traditions is based on the altruistic motive to save all sentient beings from their suffering. You still have the bodhicitta ideal. That doesn't go away. Motivation is key for Vajrayana practice. And the Vajrayana teaches that all practices are to be undertaken with a motivation to achieve Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. Guess what? That's the essential difference between this, and you could use very similar tantric techniques to become an egomaniac if you don't have the correct motivation. You could use the same kind of power of concentration, for example, to become vastly rich and powerful over others. Why not? They're just energies. You can develop that. But the thing that will make it spiritually valuable is the motivation to save all other sentient beings or just to practice the paramitas. Okay? In fact, these skillful means are called upaya. It means using spiritual techniques in appropriate, wise, and effective ways. The whole Vajrayana, which has some very exotic spiritual practices, you wonder, what the heck is this? What are we doing? It's all there to accomplish the goals of the Vajrayana, to liberate you from your own delusion, to help you realize the goal, to really be of benefit to other beings. Okay, it's all there, all right? It's based on this notion of skillful means, as formulated in the Mahayana Buddhism. More specifically, it means the use of various liturgies. That's elaborate sort of prayer practices that is often encapsulated in our wonderful prayer book from the Tibetan Buddhist Center. There it is. Mantras, forms of meditation to remove the various obscurations and the ignorance that prevent the sentient beings from direct experience of their own Buddhahood. It's a system of lineages. That means specific traditions of teachings, often with their own individual teachers. And there are many great teachers and saints in Tibetan Buddhism that have originated these different traditions of practice, in which only those who receive initiation to a particular sadhana or set of practices are seen to share in the mind stream of the realization of a particular Vajra master or guru. At the Tibetan Buddhist Center, we frequently invoke a figure called Padmasambhava, or we just call him Guru Rinpoche. It means great revered guru, precious jewel guru. And he is a central figure in the early development of Tantric Buddhism in Tibet, and is revered as almost a semi-divine being. And yet there are legends that he was an actual teacher from India who came to Tibet to teach the practices of Tibetan Buddhism. Okay? In the Vajrayana, all these skillful means are the basis for various Tantric and Mahamudra and Dzogchen practices are what we're going to talk about next week. All right? Tantric practices, Buddhist Tantra, and Indian Tantra shares many of these practices, but Buddhist Tantra includes ritual and meditation practices using mantras, visualizations, liturgies, mandalas, and deity practices, which I'll go into briefly. Mantras, which are sacred sounds that have both a symbolic and psychic effect. Dharanis, which are recitations of specific liturgies. These should be very familiar to those of us who've been going to the Tibetan Buddhist centers, practices every morning, because that's what we do. We recite liturgies, those dharanis. We use mantras, Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Tari Tutari Ture Soha. Mudras are sacred hand gestures. We don't tend to use this, although I think Losang, I remember in my time there, would try very hard to teach us how to do these various hand gestures and mudras. Use of ritual implements and sacred images, the use of mandalas, visualizations, all of this I will go over, okay? Inner body energy practice. That's mysterious. I don't remember us. Actually, Losung does teach an inner body energy practice. I'll try to remember to bring it up when we get to that stage. And ritual worship that may include meditational deities and celestial Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. So what are these things? So the mantra means specifically to protect the mind. Protect the mind from what? It means to protect your mind from yourself, basically your ordinary deluded perceptions. If you get into the mantra, and I suggest you do, let's say you're practicing meditation, shamatha meditation, and you can't stop thinking about a certain TV program or a certain politician that you hate. Okay, you can't stop thinking about them. Use some mantras. So starting Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Vajraguru Padme Sri Om, Om Vajraguru Padme Sri Om, Om Vajraguru Padme Sri Om, Om Vajraguru Padme Sri Om. And you'll find out very shortly, you'll stop thinking about that person or that TV program. Then suddenly they'll come back, do the mantras more, and you'll find it'll change you quite a bit. Mantras can be repeated over and over, either loudly or to yourself. In the tradition, they're often given or bestowed to students by a guru or Vajra master. My own guru gave me a personal mantra, and I'm not supposed to ever repeat it, but I still use it. Over about 35 years later, I still use my personal mantra in addition to other mantras. This is a great one. Right down there is it's written out in Tibetan script. There is loosely my current teacher, who's an expert on Indian tantric practice. He says it's actually not very good to know exactly what a mantra means. It's a syllable that has a far deeper effect on the nervous system, on the subtle body, than you would suspect. Nevertheless, we're Americans. We want to know what things mean. So loosely, there's what the Om Mani Padme Hum called the famous 6-syllable mantra. Okay, you know what it means. Finally, mudras are symbolic or ritual gestures or postures that represent Dharma teachings. Whenever we look at our wonderful Buddhist statues, you can see Tara, lovely Tara behind me, and there's a little image of the Buddha. And Buddha is in a mudra, which indicates teaching various aspects of the Dharma. All right, all these mudras. We both see them in statues and images. All of the gestures are very symbolic. You cannot, if you try drawing pictures of Buddha, don't make up your own little gestures. Follow the traditional ones because they have a deep resonance, meanings, personal meanings with people and also with traditions. All right, you actually will receive the benefits more clearly if you focus as closely as you can on the mudras and the iconography of the particular images you're working with. All right. If that sounds a little unsettling or upsetting to you, well, the Vajrayana can be very unsettling and very upsetting. Okay, you just have to put up with it for now, and you might see the value of it or not as time goes on. A mandala, and we have a great master of mandala because we have a ritual Vajra master in Losung Samten, and of course, this is a principal practice of his is sharing mandalas. And they are principally an offering. When you create, when one of the monks, either Losung or a group of monks create, when they're offering this, a practice of deep dana or generosity to the universe. You probably know from Losung talking about it, the monks and a serious practitioner actually visualize the whole mandala. And Losung can visualize the Kali Chakra mandala, which is a very complicated one with 100 deities plus in it. He visualizes the whole thing in his head. And you often, when you use, oh no. Let's see. I think we're all right. Yeah, there's something happened, but I'm not quite sure what. Okay. He often, Losung can visualize the entire thing in his head while he's chanting a liturgy and associated with the mandala. Also, an interesting thing to know about the mandala is they are a two-dimensional picture of what's intended to be a temple, a three-dimensional structure. You can find online three-dimensional graphics, you know, sort of computer simulations of what one of these flat mandalas look like if they're made into a temple. I chose this image from the internet because I think these are the 4 portals. Okay, they all have deeply spiritual meanings. You know, north, south, east, and west. You know, different. I think this is associated with Vajra. I think this is Ratna. I think this is Amoghasiddha, and this is Padmasambhava, or Padma family down there. Anyway, and then you have the deity. I think that's Medicine Buddha in the very center of it. I think these things are stylized representations right there of three-dimensional, this whole mandala, three-dimensionally depicted. It is symbolically a whole sacred universe in one of these mandalas. Bell and Dorje is another one that I'm very fond of, and I brought my own personal Bell and Dorje to show it to you. What are the meaning of the Bell and Dorje? And I just used my wrong hand. All right, the Vajra, you know, in your right hand, the bell, okay, in your left hand. Various meanings. I looked it up on the internet. You know, to me, they represent absolute and relative reality. Absolute relative reality. They represent all the female deities to which I adore, and all the male deities like Vajrasattva, you know, like over here. But what are some of the other meanings? They represent emptiness and form. It's the wisdom that understands the unity of emptiness and compassionate action in the world, Dorje. It's a personal meditation, Yidam deity, the Dorje, and your deity's mandala, which is the bell. Okay, it's the six perfections, the perfection of wisdom, okay, the unity of wisdom, and the five perfections of generosity, morality, patience, joyous endeavor, and concentration, the Dorje. And it's the path to enlightenment, wisdom, the bell, and compassion. And there's more meanings associated. Up above in that wonderful graphic, we're seeing a Tibetan monk reciting the liturgy from a traditional form of printing. And you see right in front of him, I think that's an offering, right, sitting at his foot, an offering to the deities, a formal stylized offering called a torma. And then you see him in his hand holding the bell and the Dorje. And you can see Losung Samten doing it. And it's very beautiful because they use these very elaborate ritual hand gestures, mudras, as they're using them. And it's very beautiful. This gets into what are samaya, or the use of vows into tantric practice. Vajrayana initiates need to abide by various tantric vows, or samaya, of behavior. They're extensions of the rules of the monastic Hinayana practice for the monks. Okay, the monks were required to state, and then as now, many personal vows of renunciation and strict adherence to the rules of the order. There are also outgrowths of the bodhisattva vows that some of us have taken to save all sentient beings. Okay, the lower levels of tantra, these are initiate, the first levels of vows and promises we make, okay, to uphold certain principles of the Dharma. They're taken during initiation into the empowerment. That's considered, the empowerment is a ritual initiation. And literally, something is transmitted from the Vajra Guru to enable us, to empower us, to really practice certain of these Vajra rituals. Okay? The special tantric vows vary according to the specific mandala practice for which the initiation is received, and also depending on the level of initiation. Okay? I've received myself many what I could call initiatory, empowerments for certain deities, including Green Tara behind me and many others. And also I've been specifically indoctrinated with a little more serious sadhana that I'll share with you in a minute. Okay, an image of one of the deities that are part of the liturgy I practice. All right, in order to engage in Vajrayana practice, a student, you really need to receive an initiation. If you're really doing the real Vajrayana, you need to do it after being initiated by a Vajra Guru. And I suppose Losung, I'm sure he has Vajra students, because you're supposed to keep it kind of quiet when you do this stuff. It's not really a public thing. It's a personal, private relationship between oneself and your Vajra teacher. Why is it sacred? Because these are considered to be very potent, very powerful practices. They're often individual for you. If you practice, don't do them properly. It's warned in all the literature that you can harm yourself physically and mentally. What do they mean by that? Because that sounds very scary. Well, you become very obsessive. You can become very depressed. All right. You can actually become irritable. Lots of strange things happen in the middle of doing these very intense practices. I myself have experienced a lot of these things, okay? The teachings can be considered self-secret, on the other hand, because if you haven't been initiated into this, if you don't understand the context, you're not going to really understand it. Like if you go around and having doing a lot of tantric ritual, but you don't know anything about it, it's all you're going to do is trivialize something which is very powerful and very sacred. It's similar to somebody going around with a physics textbook, advanced physics, spouting physics. They don't know what they're saying. It doesn't have any effect on anything. The teachings are secret in the minds of those who are not, they're secret within the minds of those practicing this Tantra. If you're not following the tantric path with serious intent and motivation, they aren't going to have any effect. So don't worry too much about doing. If you've been initiated, and let's say you get initiated in some pretty powerful practice, and you try to use them for black magic, you try to do them to cause harm to others, that's really gonna backfire badly. There is an interesting story. One of the saints of Tibetan Buddhism is Milarepa, and if you remember the life of Milarepa, you ought to do it. He started out his life by misusing a lot of sort of powerful tantric techniques given to him by a sorcerer. And he spent the rest of his life getting over all the negative karma that he had accumulated because of doing those things. Which brings us into the relationship with the guru or the Vajra master. In his or her role as Vajrayana guru or master, the guru is to be considered as if you were relating to the Buddha itself. Not personal. It's not a personal relationship. It's almost like a relationship with your doctor, okay? You're not talking about, let's say you're getting some diagnosis from, you're working with your doctor. The politics we're here don't matter. Personal feelings about one another don't matter. We're just talking about the doctor working with a physical ailment that you have right there. It's that kind of relationship that is much exaggerated. Okay, in the role of the Vajrayana guru or master, not as a human being. The guru is to be considered as the Buddha itself. The guru is to be considered the ultimate guide to your spiritual sadhana. Notice what this does not include. You are not the ultimate guide to your spiritual sadhana. Your guru is. That's going to rub a lot of us the wrong way. But that's what the tradition says. Vajrayana, also a very beautiful poetic way of stating it, said, don't trust anybody but your Vajrayana master with deep spiritual issues in yourself. Don't listen to your parents. Don't listen to your best friend. Don't listen to good advice. Don't listen to books. It's your Vajrayana master. That's the Vajrayana relationship. Vajrayana Buddhism is esoteric. It depends on the transmission of certain teachings that occurs from teacher to student during a period of initiation or empowerment. It's a big deal to have a Vajrayana teacher or master. One of my teachers made it very clear, whispered to me, he said, I am your spiritual friend. I am not your tantric guru. I knew that, but I took that to heart. I'm your spiritual friend, Kalyanamita. That just means somebody like me. I'm a spiritual teacher. I am not nobody's guru, right? That is a very particular relationship. Many techniques are said to be secret, but some Vajrayana teachers just say it doesn't matter because, you know what, they aren't going to work outside of the particular relationship with your Vajra guru or your Vajra teacher. By the way, the Vajra guru relationship is much criticized in current spiritual practice. Many people are saying it's corrupt practice. It leads to a lot of misunderstandings and hurt feelings. We've outgrown it. We don't need it anymore. I disagree. I think if you're serious about the Vajrayana, I'm sorry, this is the center of the whole practice. By the way, does your guru have to be alive? Much discussed? I'll leave it that way. Can you relate to Ramana Maharshi, for example, or to Padmasambhava as your Vajra master? You can discuss that with Losang. A tantric guru is expected to keep his or her samaya vows in the same way as his or her students. Proper conduct is considered particularly necessary for a qualified Vajrayana guru, and there is a lot of scandals in the news about Vajrayana teachers who misuse that special relationship. It has caused a lot of havoc. And it's something, if you run into all of that, you can look at it and think about it yourself. The practice is secret outside the teacher-student relationship. No serious Vajrayana student discusses their Vajrayana practices and their experiences with outside people. I'm going to share one or two things with you guys, but I'm not truly, well, let me just drop that. Secrecy and mutual commitment, all right? It's part of the samaya, or the sacred bond between the practitioner and the integrity of the teachings. If you blabbermouth about your personal experiences in tantric practice, guess what? They won't work anymore. They won't. It's not that kind of relationship. So what is going on in these tantric practices? I made them sound pretty weird and pretty mysterious. Well, they are, okay? Is yidam practice. That's the key thing. Very difficult, much misunderstood. A deity used for your personal meditation practice is called a yidam. It can be the Buddha, Bodhisattva, or other sacred embodied images of the Dharma. Yidam refers to, I think, Tibetan Buddhism. But it could be an image from India. Guess what? I hope I don't offend anybody, but those wonderful images of Christ, where he's standing there holding a sacred heart, he's got a hand up or something. I used to see that in Catholic retreat centers when I would go and do Buddhist retreats at Catholic retreat centers. That's a tantric image. It's not the way Buddha didn't actually, I mean, Christ didn't actually stand there holding a bleeding heart. It's a symbolic image, and it's designed to transmit certain kinds of spiritual understandings. That's what a yidam does, okay? They use them in all traditions all over the world, okay? It's what the original, well, all traditions and all over the world, sacred images. Yidam means a sacred bond with a wisdom mind, or a joining together with a wisdom mind. Remember, idolatry is to worship the statue itself. That's not what you're doing. That's the legend of the golden calf from the Old Testament. You're worshiping the spiritual energy, or the principle, or the ideal that the image represents. Okay? By focus in meditation and in life on a particular yidam, all right, the goal is to completely transform your ordinary dualistic consciousness and into that mind of enlightened energy and wisdom embodied in the yidam. Remember that, because we're going to talk about that more in a moment. You're supposed to leave your ordinary consciousness behind and enter into what that image represents. The Vajri Guru will initiate the student into yidam practice, most appropriate to the individual student. That's at the advanced levels. Many of us have particular practices with yidams. I do. And I wasn't really concretely sat down and said, this is what you must do by some Vajra Guru. It's actually something grew on me. It was a green Torah. And many of us find ourselves drawn to or attracted to one or another meditational deities. Green Torah is a favorite of a lot of people. And that's her right behind me. We'll talk about her coming up. A lot more about Green Torah coming up. So, Chogyam Trungpa, a great Vajrayana master, and a very famous one, and an inspiration for an enormous number of realized practitioners. The deity is a manifestation of your basic being. It's you. I repeat, the deity is a manifestation of your basic being. It is the psychological manifestation of enlightened mind in a form you can relate with. Psychological manifestation means it shows up in your own way your mind works. Green Torah doesn't really look like that. Or she does. She shows up in that form because she's very easy to relate to looking like that. That's why she appears in that form. The mind is attracted to that form, likes that form. Okay? It's a psychological manifestation of enlightened mind. And it's in a form that you can relate with. It's this Trungpa. So here's one that a lot of people are like, what? I can't relate to that. So this is the yidam called, she's called the dark form of Vajrayogini. And her name is Trolma Nagpo. I once said to my teacher, Jay Lippman, I said, oh yeah, she's Kali. And he said, no, she's not Kali. She's Trolma Nagpo. I'm sorry. She derives ultimately from Indian figures of various forms of Kali. Vajrayogini's essence means the great passion. And it's a transcendent passion, a godlike passion, like godlike wrath. It's free of any kind of personal selfishness or illusion. It's pure energy. It works intensely for your well-being. And it's specifically about the destroying of egoistic illusion and attachments. All right? she is seen as particularly useful for people with strong passions, like me, because she provides a way to transform them into enlightened virtues, not destroy them, transform them. This is the essence of the Vajrayana, is not trying to suppress things, not try to change things. You use the energy of delusion. You use the energy of attachments for spiritual purposes. They're just energies anyway. They're just psychological, psychic energies. They're world energies. Why not turn them sacred? Proma Nagpo is particularly wrathful, a highly charged form of Vajrayogini, and I showed her deliberately for that because I'm not an expert on the iconography of the various Tibetan deities. Some of them I know pretty well, but most of them I don't. They're all, as you contemplate these things, often in your visualization, each one of these elements have specific kinds of symbolic references. She is wearing, for example, the skin of an elephant, which I think represents pride. And that's a pretty significant thing to overcome in your personal sadhana, is your own pride. She's also waving the skin of a human being. Can you see that up above there? All right, what's that represents like that? You're going to be flayed alive as you really practice your egoistic attachments, things that you lust after and you hate, are going to be destroyed in your Vajrayana practices. That's what's going to do it, is this kind of level of passionate energy that she represents. And she's dancing on the figure of delusion down below. Lots more to be said about that. So, this kind of practices, okay, sophisticated, advanced Vajrayana practices need something to prepare the mind. And the preparatory activities are called nundro. They come in two different stages. The first one's called the preliminary practices. They're to establish, I'm reading back from the text, they're establish the foundation for the more advanced and rarefied Vajrayana sadhanas, which are held to engender realization and the embodiment of enlightenment. The preliminary practices are divided into two parts. The first are called the common and ordinary preliminary practices, and the second are called the special or extraordinary kind of preliminaries. These practices purify negative deeds, and they generate a lot of merit or spiritual virtue. And traditionally, they're done for the enlightenment of the spiritual aspirant, but they're also part of the practices to dedicate them to the betterment of all other beings. Okay, you're practicing not just for yourself, but for universal salvation. That's the bodhicitta ideal. So, what are these common preliminary practices? I actually gave a talk recently on just the 4 common preliminaries. All right, they are constant companions on spiritual path. They never go away. You never actually completely get these things. Okay, they're very similar to the 4 Dharma seals. A little bit of differences. And because I gave a big talk, why don't you listen to the talk I gave on things which you should take to heart. And if you properly begin to really let these things in to who and what you are, they will completely change your life. They'll change who you are if you really understand what an amazing thing it is to be born the way you are. It's amazing. You got the jackpot. You better do something with it because you just won the lottery being who you are. The other thing is that everything changes. Not enough will change everything in your life if you realize that nothing stays the same. Finally, when you realize that karma is real, that every thought, word, and deed you generate has consequences, and you yourself are the result of things that were volitionally caused in your past thought, word, and deed, changes your attitude towards what you are and what you think about, changes it quite a bit. And finally, that the way you're living your life now and what they're called samsara ain't never going to work out. It doesn't matter what you get or achieve. It's never going to work out, especially not for the whole planet. Samsara just can't work. You have to choose a different method. Then there are the extraordinary preliminaries that I am technically in the middle of myself. Nundro, the extraordinary preliminaries. These practices are to clarify and purify the motivation and capacity to understand the higher commitments of Vajrayana practice. Vajrayana requires a commitment of everything in your life. That's why it's not for everybody. The serious path of Vajrayana requires a total commitment. They're designed to clear away all your negative karma and accumulate spiritual merit. They can take, let's say, 1,500 hours of work to accomplish once. And a number of Vajrayana practitioners practice these sets multiple times. Okay? You're supposed to prostrate. That's a full prostration on the ground. You can see in videos, some people do this. 100,000, or sometimes they tell you 110,100, even more. Prostrations, taking refuge in the three roots of the Guru, Dharma, and spiritual protectors, instead of the community or what they call the Sangha. Spiritual protectors is all of the spiritual entities in the spiritual Vajrayana spiritual universe. All of them that you need the good graces of. All of these psychological forces or spiritual forces, you need the good graces of. They're the protectors. You need to recite all of the Vajrasattva mantra. A lot of you are already doing this, or you practice that in it's the 100-syllable mantra, and you recite it 100,000 or more times, okay? 100,000 mandala offerings, purifying attachment. It's like a little, it's a symbolic thing of giving up. It represents the whole universe, but you have a little ritual way of doing it. And you practice ultimate generosity, like devoting yourself to giving your everything away to the entire universe. And finally, Guru Yoga practices, which are to clarify and deepen your relationship with the ultimate Guru or ultimate Vajra master. Not the individual person that you think that you might be devoted to, but its spiritual power, its true reality. So, what does tantric meditation consist of? Let's say you're involved with Nundro. What's the next step? What do you do? Where is this going? It can be summarized in something called the generation and completion stages. All right. Whatever deity you have chosen or has been given to you by your Vajra teacher, you have to practice first the generation stage, and then you practice the completion stage in the sadhana, the set of practices associated with that deity. The generation stage, you will completely erase temporarily and eventually, hopefully permanently, the way you think of yourself and the world. By you literally visualize yourself, you become that deity. All right? Sounds very exotic. When you do it, it's exotic, actually. All right? The purpose of the generation stage is to eliminate your identification with your ordinary self. Guess what? Here's a big secret. You aren't who you think you are anyway. Your personality is also just some ideas that you have in your head that you've picked up from your teachers and from your friends and your reflections on yourself from television. You yourself are just a generated visualization of what you think you are. Why not generate somebody like Green Tara? And first you pretend, then after a while, you start really feeling it. A deep relationship, identification with a particular deity. Remember, you're not worshiping a god or goddess. It represents a certain state of enlightened awareness, enlightened intelligence. The masters have said that conceiving of oneself as a deity is actually closer to reality than grasping at this fiction of what you think you are, your changeable thoughts and moods and beliefs. That isn't real anyway. The deity is actually more enduring. Spiritual realities are more enduring than this fiction that you've created about yourself. That's just something you picked up and you will discard. Okay? You're in fact already enlightened. You're already a Buddha. What you're developing is realizing what you actually already are. Sounds crazy. But the Vajrayana is designed to sound crazy. To the ordinary conceptual mind, it does sound crazy. People are doing this right now. I do this kind of stuff. All right? So the generation stage, deity yoga. So what do? You identify your own form, the way you look, your attributes, meaning the mudras and the various spiritual qualities, and the mind of bodhicitta, with those of your particular yidam. And you do so to transform temporarily and eventually a little bit more sustained. You're reprogramming your mind, remember. It's like reprogramming your hard drive. Okay? Yidam is sometimes translated the term meditational deity or tuliary deity. They can include Shakasambhava, Kalachakra, Evajra, Yamataka, that's the god of death, and Vajrayana, all of whom have a distinctive iconography, mandala, mantra, rites of invocation and practice. Bodhisattvas like green taro, white taro, manjushri can be yidams, and the yidam is used as a means or goal for transformation to become the mind of enlightenment, the mind of bodhicitta. According to certain traditions, the yidam is considered as an emanation of the adept's own mind. It doesn't mean your ordinary personality mind. It means the part of you, guess what? This whole world, according to the scientists, everything you experience, think, and do is happening as electrical firings inside the brain. And here's from the Vajrayana perspective. That idea of the electrical firings inside your brain, that's just some idea that the scientists came up with to explain something which is a complete mystery. The fact that all of this shows up out of emptiness. It is emptiness. Okay, why not visualize it as a deity would? Visualization. The first step is to build up that visualization in your mind, in your imagination. That takes some doing because we don't believe it, we think it's ridiculous, or we can't make our mind do what we want it to do, very common. So remember, this is attached to shamatha and vipassana meditation, concentration and insight meditation. You have to actually invite, allow enlightened energy. What is that? You'll have to find out, okay? Enlightened energy to infuse it, empower it, and make it real beyond this imaginary reality. This will actually occur. Sidebar, we have no idea what we really are. And we have no idea how magnificent it is to have the human mind and imagination. It's beyond amazing. This stuff really does exist in a relative way, far more than our personality that we think is real. Enlightened energy is not really outside of you, but you can't really say it's inside of you either. It's not really a product of your personal will or your intelligence or your imagination. You will experience this for yourself. Something else happens. It's very mysterious. Your own deeper awakened mind is going to be creating this visualization ultimately. The main practice is to sustain an identification with this wisdom being while reciting the mantra associated with that being and holding the sacred view that the entire world around you is a mandala of the enlightened energy Buddha field generated by that deity. All beings are already intrinsically perfect and enlightened, and all communications, all sounds that you hear are actually the voice of God. You're hearing mantras. Everything is sacred communication. And I wish I had more time. We could talk more about it, but we're going to go on here. One then slowly dissolves this visualization into a single point called a bindu. Within the visualized sacred energy field that you are, often within your heart chakra, not your physical heart, your heart chakra. Finally, dissolve that visualization into emptiness and rest in that experience. We've actually done this a little bit at TVC. A little bit more, Vajrayana yantra. Yantra is not a mandala, but it is actually a visual representation of a mantra. Okay, here is a yantra associated with Vajrayana. Okay, and don't talk in Tibet Buddhist practice a lot with yantras, but you will see them depicted and sometimes used as meditation. This one, for me, is a lot easier to visualize than the whole mandala. Mandala is pretty complicated, but this thing I can work with pretty clearly. There's Vajrayana in the center. These are little attendant deities down below, and right what that little thing is right there, I don't know if you can see this, but the little thing at the bottom of the image down there, that is an offering. You know, ultimately you're offering your own body, mind, and sacred energy to the deity. Completion stage. You identify, as you practice the identification on deeper and deeper levels with the tantric deity, you realize that everything is just a visualization. Everything is just an emanation. Everything is just an appearance. Everything abides by, this is the line from the Heart Sutra. When basically, in the Heart Sutra, I won't look it up right now, I don't have time. Basically, it's like, how are we supposed to do this? You know, how does this work? And Buddha basically says, the Tathagatas, those who arrive, those who understand this, abide by means of prajna paramita. That is deep wisdom energy. They absolutely realize that the absolute and the relative are the same. Things exist, but only in a relative way. Everything is emanations upon emanations. The wisdom that realizes this emptiness and has gained insight into the nature of reality is going to vary quite a bit according to the level of subtlety of the consciousness that is perceiving that emptiness. Your experience will grow and grow and grow of this. That's why you do the practice over and over and over and over and over again. So gradually deepening identification with the real, not the imaginary, but the real nature of this yidam. All right? When emptiness is realized by the subtlest layer of the mind, it's much more powerful, and it has a great effect on your personality and on the world around it. For one thing, a lot of your ordinary suffering disappears. Okay? Becomes wisdom, just wisdom, energy, manifestations. Okay, got to go on here. So, what is being affected when you're doing all this stuff? Well, here we're getting in deeply into the weeds, and I'm trying to finish up here because I still want to show you a sadhana. To be able to make use of these subtle layers of consciousness, you have to get rid of this ordinary, lumpy, conditioned consciousness that you inhabit, which if you've been a serious meditator, you realize is a train wreck anyway. What you think of as your ordinary mind is just a bunch of impulses, energies, crazy thoughts. It's just a mess. All right? You've done the classic way of doing this, or a Vajrayana way of doing it, is to work with the energy body. And you work with, this is a very deep study. I don't think I'm qualified, but it's a course in itself. In fact, it's a lifetime's practice of itself. It's the chakras, prana, which is the life force. Okay? I think they have a different word for it for the Tibetans. I think they what do they call it? Not the lung. They call it lung. All right. Bindu, which means the point of energy. Nadi, that's just the energy channels in the body, and something called the central channel, which in the Tibetan tradition is called the Abhiduti, and in the Indian tradition is called Shun, in the subtler energy body. A lot of you out there, or a lot of people say, they're doing Kundalini practices and stuff. As Losam once said, he says, they often are fooling themselves. It's not really that. It's a big topic, and you should do it with some supervision. Tantric practices such as meditation on the chakras and channels can control and temporarily abandon the rougher levels of consciousness. This is true. When they become suppressed, they temporarily get occluded by the energy that you're bringing to your attention. Whenever you bring your attention to one part of the energy body, it becomes a bindu. And the pranas tend to gather there. The energies tend to gather in wherever you're focusing your attention. These subtler levels of consciousness become alive. Powerful spiritual insights will arise, and they do. A lot of delusion will arise too, so be careful. Tantric practices involve the most subtle consciousness can quickly bring you to the goal of enlightenment. The three kayas. I don't know if we have a long time. Let me go through quickly because this comes up. You hear a lot of it in our sadhanas, in our book at the TBC, and you'll hear these. They mean literally the wisdom bodies of the Guru. And you should know the terms. They're huge topics. Dharmakaya refers basically to your Buddha nature and to the absolute nature of reality. It's associated with a point right here, okay, in the forehead. The Sambhogyakaya refers to all of the speech and actions in their sacred dimensions, refers to sacred utterance or speech like mantra and visualizations of the deity. Expressiveness, okay, is right here. Sambhogyakaya. They're not really connected with the chakras. They are and they aren't. They're actually, I've never read a description of how they're associated with the chakras, but Oma Hong is something we frequently recite in the Tibetan Buddhist Center. And finally, the Nirmanakaya. In a classical sense, it refers to a sacred being like the Buddha manifesting in a physical reality that we see in relative reality in space-time continuum. More in a larger sense, they represent the embodiment of sacred world in a form that we all interact together as bodies, as beings. We touch and see each other. Okay, that's the Nirmanakaya emanation. The Dharmakaya, I just talked about it a little bit. I'm going to go on because I want to leave us some time. My guru would have called the Dharmakaya as the abstract reality. It's the space-time field. It is the quantum field of possibilities. It's the space, the emptiness that allows everything to manifest out of emptiness. It's emptiness itself. You know, that quality. Everything is fundamentally emptiness. The emptiness is the Dharmakaya, the emptiness aspects. The Shambhogakaya, everything is meaningful. Everything is expressive. Everything means something to something else. Everything is help defining something else. The apple is red because the light rays strike the pigment cells in the apple. They have a mutual relationship that allow redness to appear. The expressive redness that shows up, that we perceive in our mind, that's Shambhogakaya aspect. It's sacred sound, sacred speech, sacred meanings, okay? All to the enlightened state of mind, all sounds are mantras and expression of the Shambhogakaya. Finally, the 5 Buddha wisdoms. I would love to go into this, but I'm not going to have time. All right. These are aspects of how the kayas show up. Okay. And they have been personified as almost as deities. They're used in tantric rituals. The Nirmanakaya is finally the physical aspect that I explained of the Buddha field. An interesting little talk is, you will hear Tibetan Buddhists say that the goal of Vajrayana practice is to develop what they call the rainbow body or the purified body. Okay? And it's supposed to be the body which is completely free from all the egoistic delusions and kleshas and all the problems we have. And it's an aspect of Vajrayana and specifically Tibetan forms of Buddhism, which I found sort of fascinating and just like totally weird at the same time. But you will very well come across with something called the rainbow body, and it's an aspect of what they call the Nirmanakaya. It's also, in the classical sense, considered the Buddha is the Nirmanakaya manifestation of the Dharmakaya. And the Nirmanakaya is what allows the Shambhogakaya expression of the teachings of the Buddha to take place. That's the benefit, extraordinary benefit of other beings. Tantric path. I think we're finally getting here. The Vajrayana techniques are to make it possible to experience Buddha nature. Okay, I'm just reviewing these things, so I've got a few more minutes, and I want to quickly go over sadhana so that you have a real experience of what a sadhana is about. And I'm going to have to forgive me. I've got 6 or 7 or 8 minutes. I'll go maybe a couple of minutes over. This is taken from Losang's online. There is a little booklet you can download where he says 2 practices for green Tara. Since green Tara is a yidam of my own, I decided to choose. I also looked on the internet and I couldn't find an image of what do we call it? Not a tanka. I could not find an image that I liked of green Tara, so I used my own. And this is an image that she presented to me, and I'm speaking playfully, but also with meaning. She allowed herself to manifest in there was a traveling monk from Tibet who had a bunch of paintings on display. They were raising money to benefit some kind of monastery or something. And this was maybe the first year or two of my association with Losang. And this was over in Philadelphia church somewhere I saw this. There it was. And I looked at her and I went, oh my God, I'm getting her. And she was not cheap. And I think she's just lovely. So this is my own little tanka. So here's how the sadhana goes. I'm going to go through it quickly and just read it. It's a sadhana. It's designed to be meditated with. You can download it from the website and try it yourself. Read it out loud to yourself and try to make it real for yourself. Don't try to do all of the elaborate visualizations and memorizations. Soon enough, you will memorize these sadhanas. And the more you practice it, the more benefit you'll get. Very little practice, very little benefit. Lots of practice, lots of benefit. Like yoga, like anything else. So, this is some of Losang talking. In the past as well as today, many people have fulfilled their worldly needs. She also takes care of you in the relative way. And reach nirvana and enlightenment through the practice of Mother Tara. Okay, the practice of Tara is powerful to help us overcome our fears. She's specifically about anxiety fears. She's specifically to protect you about that. Reduce stress and achieve a better future. Heal physical and mental illness, as well as improve our relationship with others and with ourselves and others. She actually works. This happened to me just the other day. I all the time the circumstances, but I was praying to green Tara and help showed up that afternoon. I was like, oh my God, it works. Taking Tara into our daily practice is extremely beneficial and helps us overcome mental, physical, and spiritual obstacles. Those who are willing to take green Tara as their personal yidam receive tremendous benefits. Yet if anybody completes even just one Tara mantra meditation with positive intention to benefit self and others, it's very beneficial. In India, where the Buddhist practice originated, we see the image of Tara frequently depicted. By the way, she's ancient. She's an Indian goddess too, and she has many manifestations. She's Mahadevi, great female goddess. She's, anyway, frequently depicted, which shows that this is just one of the main practices since the very beginning of Buddhism. I don't think the Buddha himself practiced yidam meditation, but whatever. This is an ancient practice, and it's been transmitted with unbroken lineage for over 2,500 years. In Tibet, all the major schools of Buddhism, Tara is practiced by all of them, and many highly realized masters. Really, even though she's not a really esoteric one with many initiations, she's sort of for everybody. That's why I like her. Okay, she isn't one of these highly specialized deities. And everybody, when you get in trouble, it's like you call on Tara. And we're so frequently in trouble. And better yet, when other people are in trouble, call on Tara. So, all the Buddhas of the past, present, and future possess wisdom, compassion, and action. They're all enlightened and possess all of these abilities. However, each Buddha has a particular qualities that stand out based on their specific motivation prior to becoming enlightened. All right. A very traditional understanding of a bodhisattva is they start out as ordinary deluded beings like our own, and through the Mahayana understanding, through countless lifetimes of very pure bodhicitta, very pure intent, motivation, they eventually become different levels of bodhisattvas. And supposedly Tara started out that way as an ordinary being. Mother Tara is associated with qualities of action. She's specifically, that's why she's got one leg sticking out. She's ready to leap into action. By the way, you're not supposed to change the positioning or the iconography of these images. They lose their potency. They all have highly specific representations. And if I had more time, I would explain some of them to you from Green Tara. It's said that those who meditate on Tara receive these qualities more quickly than through meditation on male Buddhas. Okay, here I, and that's Losam, offer a Tara practice that contains all the essential elements of the Tara practice that you can do every day. And I focused up closer. This is to help us remember her. First, we start out our sadhana. We're now going into the official sadhana, the prayer that you can practice. You look at the image of Green Tara and you say, I take refuge until I'm enlightened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Through the merit I create by practicing giving and the other perfections, may I obtain Buddhahood for the sake of all sentient beings. The four immeasurables. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be freed from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings never be separated from the happiness that knows no suffering. May all sentient beings live in equanimity, free from attachment and aversion. Visualization is a very common practice in Buddhism, especially in the Vajrayana. Visualizing an image can be used at any level of spiritual practice for the Buddhist, with the Hinayana, Mahayana, Vajrayana motivations, and non-Buddhists alike. Indians use them all the time, so do the Catholics. Use them a lot. In Buddhism, especially Mahayana Buddhism, the image is visualized based on a foundation of loving kindness and compassion to all living beings, that essential motivation. Sometimes it's difficult to expand your thoughts to all living beings, but it's very beneficial if you can. Include, just for me, a little tip, stick in those ones you especially dislike. They're just your projections anyway. Why not put them in there? Okay? You're the deity. To generate bodhicitta, the prayer of refuge and the four immeasurable thoughts help generate strong, positive motivation. Once that feeling has been generated, it's beneficial to include a short practice on sunyata, emptiness. Wish I had more time to go into that. Generate the feeling that I am not this limited mind body that I think I am. I, in fact, am limitless space. I am all possible sounds are divine sounds. All possible forms are emptiness manifestations. I am that. Tatsubami. I am divine. Generate a sense of emptiness, and all ordinary mundane thoughts and appearances, allow them to disappear. When they come back, allow them to disappear. Don't try to push them away, because that's part of your ordinary delusive thinking. Focus on Tara and allow them to disappear. There arises an awareness of interdependence and interconnectedness, as well as an awareness that nothing exists in the way we perceive it. As long as possible, remain in that level of consciousness. Then from that state, there will arise a beautiful red open lotus with beautiful petals. The petals are fresh and covered with dew. On that lotus, standing on a moon disk, is the green letter Tam. That is her mantra. Or actually, it's called a bija, seed syllable. That's the essence of her mantra. Tam. Light rays emanate from the form of Tam. Green symbolizes air, action, and protection. Tam is the seed syllable of Tara. It represents her very essence. The syllable Tam in the lotus should be visualized, holding the image in your mind with the same size and colors each day, which strengthens your concentration. That's more important than I used to realize. Generalize. Basically, allow your mind to generate the image. Don't obsess on it too much at first, because it's not going to come easily anyway. All right, it takes a long time. So do the best you can and keep an image in front of you so you can open your eyes periodically and remind yourself. It can be any shade of green, but it should remain the same for each meditation. It's difficult to hold the details of Tara. Look upon the image of Tara. Myself, I notice I go from part to part to part. You might teach you to see half a face, and you look at a hand, and you look at a foot. To me, very quickly, this started happening automatically. It was kind of uncanny. And I would just look at little pieces. It's still difficult to hold a whole image in your mind at once. If you do so, for the brief moments that you're holding part or all of the image, you will notice your dualistic fixated mind is gone. You're actually in nirvana, but you don't realize it. As soon as you think, I'm in nirvana, it'll go away. Okay? Just allow her to do her work. The brush is wisdom and the ink is compassion. There's always the compassion of wisdom and compassion, the combination of wisdom and compassion, as well as the inner peace and bliss during the meditation. Start with a little detail and then keep adding increasing detail as your concentration becomes stronger and stronger. How long you should devote to this? About 10 or 15 minutes, if you can do it. Your mind will mightily resist you. Okay? That's your dualistic fixation, your egoistic mind. Resist this, because this is actually in the process of destroying your egoistic mind. She is replacing it with her own energies. Allow her to do so. Slowly begin to feel that the image is increasingly lifelike, transforming from an image or painting into a real human. Also remember, though, that she's a being of light. Don't turn her into like a little imaginary playmate. She's a being of light. She's a meditational yidam. Okay, so he said, like a human being, you will get to the point where she seems to come alive for you. Many, many times this has been reported. She will actually smile at you. Sometimes you feel like she's talking to you. That's fine, right? But she is a being of light. She's not an ordinary flesh and being. She's not an imaginary friend. In Tara's third eye, there are three letters, Om, Ah, Hum. These are universal to all the deities. And we recite these a lot in the Tibetan Buddhist Center, and I described them a little earlier. Those are the stylized depictions of them. Those are the colors, okay? And that's loosely what they represent. Nirmanakaya, Sambhogakaya, and the Dharmakaya. As you go on with your visualization, recite this, by the way, while you're meditating. The blue letter Hung is in Tara's heart. Her heart is always open. And the syllable Hung is standing on the center of the heart, which is in the form of a lotus. This lotus has 10 petals, and on each petals are syllables of Tara's mantra. That's what these syllables are. Om Tare Tutare Ture Soha. The green letter Tam is standing in the middle of the lotus beside the letter Hung. In your third eye is Om, in your throat is Ah, and in your heart is Hung. Imagine your heart being completely open, also transformed into a 10-petaled lotus, with the letters Hung and Tam in the center, with Om, Tare, Tutare, Ture, Soha on the 10 petals. It's important as you visualize each syllable that you think about the meaning of the syllable. What are you doing with actual Tara while you're doing this? She'll take care of herself. Focus on this visualization of that particular symbol. I found it helped write it, draw it, glance at it, try to visualize, glance at it. You won't be able to do it right away, but it'll come. She'll take care of us. She'll fade away and then come back at an appropriate time. Then begin to visualize the lotus rotating clockwise. And as the flower rotates, mantras are emitted from the lotus petals. The mantras that rise are luminous like a rainbow. As one mantra is emitted, another forms behind it in a continuous spiral of mantras. At first, this seems impossibly difficult to do, but you will be surprised. Sooner or later, or maybe right away, fragments or all of this will just happen all by itself. You realize, I'm not really doing this. And you aren't. Something deeper in you is than your will or your intellect or your imagination. The mantras then enter your mouth and spiral down into your chest to circle clockwise in your heart. And where there's also a lotus with 10 petals. If you can't do it completely, focus on the feeling of doing it. Don't try to stress out too much on getting the visualization perfect. The mantra is circling your chest, radiating out all of the blessing from Tara, purifying your body, speech, and mind. Get the feeling of it. Imagine you're receiving all the blessings and gifts from Tara and that you're cleansing all negative thoughts and karma that you have accumulated in this life and across all previous lifetimes. After the mantras circulate for a while within the lotus of your heart, visualize the mantras exiting from your heart and floating back into Tara's heart. You and the image of Tara are in deep relationship. You are, in fact, the same being. By the way, when you visualize Tara, visualize her, if you can, slightly up above you, above your forehead. Look up to her a little bit. She's looking down to you. If you're really good, you can visualize her above your head. That's another way they visualize it. Facing outward. She is about one hand's length above your head. Maybe you'll find the size, but kind of a smaller image. And finally, visualize her in your heart. I know this sounds like a lot, but that's just the teaching say you visualize her in the heart. Eventually, you can do sort of all three of them at once. All right? Continuous loop of mantras. You have this personal relationship with Tara. It can get very intense. Very intense. Homage to Green Tara. You've been doing this for a while. This is back to the liturgy. This is an actual prayer that you can utter. In the most perfect place, the Bhatala. That's a palace, or the cherished heart, the palace of your heart. In that most perfect place, the Bhatala, born in the green letter Tam. Drolma, that's another name for Tara, emanates on the light rays of Tam. Drolma and entourage, please grant your presence. The gods and the demigods bow their crowns at your lotus feet. The one who liberates all the destitute. I bow to you, Drolma the mother. And finally, there's a concluding prayer. This might have gone on for maybe 20 minutes, or you're really into it. It might go on for an hour, for advanced practice. Let's say about, 15, 20 minutes. A concluding prayer. It's very important not to skip the concluding prayers. It's very traditional. It's the 7-branch prayer. I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind to greet Tara. I present the presentation. I present clouds of every kind of offering, actually, but also mentally created. Offering is the first is taking refuge. Second one is making offerings. The third is confession. I confess all my negative actions accumulated since beginningless time. The other one is sympathetic joy. I rejoice in the virtues of all holy and ordinary beings. Whatever virtue, any dharma, I rejoice. Then the entreaty, please remain until all cyclic existence ends. Please don't abandon me. Dharma, please support me. Please remain until cyclic existence ends. And turn the wheel of the Dharma for sentient beings. Be present in the world as Dharma teachings. I dedicate all the virtues of myself and others to the great enlightenment. That is dedicating the merit. Very important. That's the 7-limb prayer. There's the mantra, Om Tara Tutari Turi Soha, and it's written out in Tibetan. And the meaning of the mantra. This is again from the prayer book. All right, Om, enlightened energy, body and speech. Tare Tutare Ture Soha. Since we're over time, I'm going to let you read that. The effects of a mantra not necessarily improve by knowing technically what they mean. They're more complex than that. Finally, the completion stage. That was all the generation stage, where you generated a complete identification with the image of Tara and her mantra and her bija seed syllable. Now the completion stage, the absorption. The Tara of image then dissolves into light. This light now dissolves into you. As the light energy dissolves into you, fear and delusion become purified. You receive the full blessings of the mantra, and you and Tara are now inseparable. Your body is Tara's body. Your speech is Tara's speech, sacred speech, and your mind becomes the mind of enlightened compassion, which is Tara's enlightened mind. Right? And finally, the dedication of merit. We always do it at the end of sadhana. By this virtuous action, may I quickly obtain the divine state of Mother Tara. And may all beings, without exception, may they be part of her sacred universe. I just changed it. By this virtuous action, may I quickly obtain the state of Tara and place all beings without exception into that pure world. So, wow. So that's a lot. I've done this basically to show you, this is one of the simpler of the Vajrayana practices or rituals that you can do without special initiation from a Vajra teacher. There are others that require special initiations, but this is a great one. This will appeal very much to some people. Like, oh my God, I love Tara. I love this ritual. I love the mantra. I really get into the reciting and I can visualize a little bit. That's just fantastic. Good. Carry on with the Vajrayana teachings. And then there's one fourth way of realizing all of this stuff, the Dzogchen, or the Mahamudra way, the direct realization of the nature of mind. Like all this stuff, skillful means, upaya, they're all done to generate benefit for oneself and others. They're very elaborate. They're very traditional. It's not really, you feel like, but it's a lot, okay? There is a radically stripped down, considered very advanced, because it's very simple. It's direct looking into the nature of the mind, of reality. It's direct experience. It's for those people who have a lot of experience with Tibetan teachings or with spiritual teachings, have gotten past a lot of the duff, really do kind of get it. A lot of this stuff, they really get it. Might only be in a preliminary one, but they're really starting to get a real feel for it. What's the essence of it? Or if you want to be a little tongue-in-cheek about it, let's say you're just too lazy to do all this stuff. Isn't there something else that might just be a little easier to do? Well, it's easier, but it's hard to get, okay? It's like drawing a perfect circle, all right? It's called the Great Seal. It's called Dzogchen, which means the great way it is. The seal is like a stamp. This is the way it is. The great diagram. This is it. Or it's called the great completion. Everything is perfect the way it is. Mahamudra, the great seal. Dzogchen, the great completion. We're going to talk about that next week. And it is going to be, it's magical. It's the most wonderful. And it's just like, what? What? It's very magical. You won't have all these wonderful images to look at and all that, but you'll have some extraordinarily profound teachings. All right. I don't even know how I'm going to present it next week. And I went 15 minutes over. That was a long talk. This is all going to be recorded, I'm pretty sure. And please review the material. I'm very happy everybody could show up for this. It's been quite a lot to take in, but Buddhism is something just amazing. And it is not a simple thing. It's a very rich, extraordinarily powerful spiritual practice. So I hope I will see all of you again next week. I dedicate the merit for the practice towards your own liberation out there, my own liberation, and the liberation of all suffering sentient beings throughout all space and time. And I will see you guys next week if I can figure out how to turn this off. All right. Thank you. See you next week.